The film begins with a man's voiceover saying that when you're a kid, you don't think about the consequences, and you feel invincible, and that people tell you all these things about repercussions and stuff like that. But there's one thing about summer, and that anything can happen, and it did in this man's case. As Doug approaches a town, we see a shot of people having fun on the beach. He's reading a book when he looks up to see a stunning view of the beach. He is driven into town with his parents, and as they unload their belongings, her mother jokingly asks if he has enough books. Their house is right next to a pier with a couple of boats moored. Doug goes down there and meets one of his friends, who tells him about the women who have arrived and how ridiculous the situation is and how easily he can get laid. The two then walk down the pier to a bar, where a man pulls out the cord for the electronics, causing the band to stop playing. He gets a few boos, but then he starts playing guitar with the band, which the audience enjoys. Doug's friend then hands him an apron and declares that summer has begun. When Doug returns home, he shouts to let everyone know he's home, but no one is there. So he goes up to his room and is looking at some pictures when he notices a new couple has moved in through the window. The wife is lovely, and he tries to catch her eye, but she goes into her house. Elliot and Lena are here. Doug continues to stare at Lena, but she looks up, startling Doug, and he turns away from the window. Later, he gets on his bike and spots Lena as she bends down to remove the sand from her shoes. Doug then goes to his friend, and they begin talking about girls once more. When they hear laughter on the other side of the beach, the two take a mattress to an old boat shed. The two then crack open their beers as his friend assures him that he will have a fantastic summer. He returns home to find that his neighbors have moved in. His father unexpectedly calls him and takes him to meet the new neighbors. Elliot tells Doug that his father has told him that he knows a lot about boats, and Elliot invites him to come see his new boat, and that he might even hire him because it pays much more than mowing lawns. The next day, Elliot goes to inspect the boat and sees Lena returning from a swim. As she goes to take a shower, he continues to observe her. Lena removes all of her clothes, and Doug is staring at her when Elliot appears and inquires about the boat. Doug informs him that the damage is mostly cosmetic, and Elliot informs him that he may be leaving for a while. The two then talk about Elliot's pay and agree on $12, but Elliot says he would have preferred $20. Later, when Doug is looking through his windows towards the neighbor's house and notices Lena changing, Elliot enters the room and tries to force himself on his wife, causing Doug to look away. The next day, Elliot drives to the waterfront and is stopped by a guard who informs him that he must verify his identity. Doug approaches Elliot and informs him that the guard is a bit strict. Elliot simply responds that he prefers it this way. Doug asks Elliot how he got all of these things while the two are standing on his boat, and Elliot responds that it was all possible because of money and good looks. Elliot sees Lena walking by again the next day when he hears a scream. He rushes out to find Lena standing near the car, as if there's a spider inside. He removes the spider and kills it. He then fixes the car for Lena but becomes awkward when she approaches. He tells his friend about this interaction, who advises him to be cautious with the husband because he does not appear to be a guy Doug would want to mess with. On his way home from work, Doug encounters Lena, who is sitting on her porch. She informs him that she has locked herself out of the house and will require his assistance to gain entry. She then asked him to keep this between them a secret because Elliot had asked her to look after herself. When it begins to rain, Lena instructs him to grab a rock, break the back window, and enter so he can open the door. Doug succeeds in getting in and opening the door for her. She extends an invitation to him to join her for a drink and hands him a beer. They begin talking, and she mentions that he has a cut. She begins cleaning and seductively assures him that he will live. Doug then kisses Lena and apologizes for the bad kiss, but she is unfazed and tells him to try again, but this time kiss better. The two begin kissing, and then Lena begins to strip. Doug assists her in taking her clothes off, and they have sex. They wake up in bed together the next day. Lena compliments him on his performance the night before and inquires if he has ever been with a girl. He jokingly refers to their sex as his third time, and Lena then falls asleep next to him. Doug returns home and even smiles to himself as he recalls his time with Lena. He then goes to see his friend, who tells him that he dialed on him the night before and plays a voice that is not Doug moaning. He then shows her a couple of girls with whom she can have sex, but Doug dismisses him. Doug continues to stare at Lena and begins working out for her over the next few days. He is working on the boat when Lena approaches him again and tells him that her husband has sent her to check on him. When they get into the boat, Lena asks him to close the cover and begins flirting with him. She starts taking off her clothes again, and they end up kissing again, which leads to sex. Doug was working at the bar that night when he noticed Lena and her husband walking. His friend approaches him from behind and points to a couple of girls, telling him that he has a good feeling about tonight. Doug is riding his bike by the next day when he notices Elliot stopped next to a store. He comes to a halt and enters the shop, where he finds Lena. They then exit through the back door and have sex, but Elliot walks into the store looking for Lena. When they hear him approaching, they come to a halt, and Lena kisses Doug before returning. Elliot later inspects the boat that Doug is repairing and informs him about the oversight before lecturing him on why he is being so difficult. Doug, he says, reminds him of himself, and he works hard. He also states that he is leaving town. Doug takes advantage of this by going to meet Lena and having a picnic on the bed. They have an intimate conversation, and Lena gets him a phone. She informs him that Elliot is a paranoid man and that the phone will facilitate their conversation. Doug rushes to the kitchen, and Lena follows, but the gardener notices them. Later, Doug returns to the waterfront and notices Elliot standing next to his boat. He walks hesitantly towards the boat and notices that Lena is on board. He then requests that Doug take the boat out to ensure that it is seaworthy. Elliot is almost hit by a beam during the ride, but he manages to duck. Elliot then claims that Doug was trying to give him dating advice and asks if he has a girlfriend. Doug confirms that he does. The boat's engine suddenly fails, and Elliot goes inside to investigate. Lena takes a moment to tell him that she is thinking about divorcing Elliot. He then comes out and requests that Doug repair it. Later that night, he receives a phone call from Lena, who is crying and informs him that Elliot assaulted her and that he is on business. Doug drives to the hospital and tells her she needs to call the cops, but she stops him and they return home. Later, while working, he receives a phone call from Lena, who is sunbathing near the beach. He accepts her invitation, and they end up having sex in a boat shack. Lena tells him she feels at ease with him. Lena then tells him about her husband's first wife, who is still fighting in court. Doug's friends then inquire about his activities and inform him that he is seeing someone, but Doug dismisses these remarks. He then returns home and notices Elliot has returned. He receives a call from Lena. He rushes to his room and calls Lena, who is standing behind him. She tells him to come over immediately because she requires him. Doug rushes to her house and discovers that Elliot and Lena got into a fight, and she hit him on the head with something. Elliot is discovered to be dead, and Lena attempts to seek assistance from Doug. Lena tells her she can't get in trouble with him and asks him what she should do. Doug then tells her that they will figure it out and that they must act normally. He goes to work at the bar and returns home to find that Lena has come to meet his parents. After an awkward exchange, Doug goes up to his room. Later that night, he goes to Lena's house, and she apologizes for being unable to stay, so she goes to his parents' house. Doug suggests that they make it appear to be an accident, but Lena tells him that this will not work. So Doug devises a new strategy, transporting Elliot's body to his boat and telling Lena that she will inform the cops that they had a fight, and Elliot fled the house. A security guard spots Doug and addresses him as Mr. Harper just as the boat is about to leave, but Doug impersonates Elliot and takes the boat away. The cops arrive at Lena's house in the morning to investigate what appears to be an accident. He notices Lena speaking with the cops. Doug used a beam from the ship to injure Doug's head again, and then set fire to the boat with alcohol and a cigarette. Doug then goes about his normal routine, serving a couple of cops who are discussing the incident. A woman is later seen driving to town. She meets with the cops and informs them that the LA Trust is taking the case very seriously. Elliot had a sizable insurance fund, which is now going to Lena, so they are looking into any wrongdoing. The woman continues to investigate what happened, questioning Lena about everything that happened and whether or not the couple had been sleeping together. Lena responds that she has had no extramarital affairs, and then stands up, irritated by the investigators' questions. The cops are also looking into the case, and the waterfront guard informs them that he may have a suspect from that night. The cops then begin speaking with Doug's father, and Doug inquires about the suspects, telling him that he thought he saw Elliot that night, but it could have been someone else. The previous insurance agent returns to the house to inspect the crime scene. She discovers the shattered glass window that Doug left the first night he met Lena. The police also question Doug's friend, who informs them that Doug may be seeing someone. Doug becomes enraged and departs. Later that night, the agent arrives at Doug's house and inquires about the night Lena paid them a visit. She informs them that they would like to see Doug. By this time, Doug is panicking and attempts to call Lena, but the call is cut when his parents return to the car. Doug then answers a few questions at the police station before being asked about Elliot's relationship with Lena by the agent. The agent tries to persuade Doug to reveal the details, but his mother steps in and tells the agent that she will not let her frame her son. Lena sends Doug a message, asking him to meet her in the boat shed. Lena informs her that they must be apart for a while and then departs. When Doug returns home, the investigator has returned and informs him that she needs his fingerprints and a mouth swab. They put Doug in the car, and the agent begins questioning him, but Doug does not respond. Doug then tells his friend and parents about his situation. Meanwhile, the cops find a match for the blood sample provided by the agent. Doug's attempts to prove his innocence are constantly thwarted, presumably by Lena. For example, a Harper's gardener who saw Doug and Lena together is murdered before the police can question him. Doug, on the other hand, escapes on his bike. He visits the watershed and meets Lena. Just as he arrives, Lena tears her clothes and begins screaming for him to let her go. She tries to make it look like an attempted rape. Doug is arrested, and he tells the cops that they know who he is and that he needs to do something to clear his name. So one cop lets him go, and he rushes to Lena's motel to steal her cell phone. But just as he's about to look for the phone, Lena and the agent walk in. He claims that the phone contains complete proof of his innocence. Doug notices that the two women have the same matching tattoo as they walk away. Doug realizes at this point that the agent is Lena's lover and has been her accomplice since the beginning. Everything flashes back to him as he realizes he was only a pawn in a larger game. At first, it appears that Lena will abandon Doug to face the charges, but in a final act of love, she decides to leave Doug the cell phone, which contains the exonerating evidence he requires. After claiming Elliot's insurance fund, the women are shown flying away in a plane. Just before the film ends, Doug explains how he was eventually sent to prison, albeit on lesser charges for a short time. Lena and her lover are still running. He ponders whether he would do it all over again.